Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back. We are talking now to Ashraf Patel. He is a senior researcher at the Institute for Global Dialogue. We're looking at the Turkish elections. All eyes globally are on. Going to be on the results of the Turkish elections. We do also understand that it seems as if there's going to be a runoff because neither one of the parties have come out at 50% or above. However, we also hear that Erdogan is sitting with just over 2 million more votes than his opposition. So, where do we stand right now? We've checked for updates, but there are no updates as yet. Perhaps Ashraf Patel will be able to give us more information. Salaam alaikum to you, Ashraf. Welcome to the program.
Walaikum salam, Julian listeners. Hope you're all well.
Alhamdulillah. So, all eyes on the result of the Turkish elections. If obviously there's going to be a runoff, that will only happen in 2 weeks' time. Am I correct?
Yes, Julie, it's a huge one, very similar to the Brazilian election in December. What we're seeing is a very intensive competition between the two ruling power blocks in Turkey. So, on the one hand, you have Erdogan, which is part of the broader Muslim kind of party who has been ruling for the last 20 years and has made significant impact on state and society. Then, on the other hand, you also have what is called the OPK secular kind of social democratic bloc. This bloc is much more kind of Western looking, and therefore the contestation is quite sharp.
Okay, let's understand. From the outside looking in, we're hearing things like Erdogan has been in power for the past 20 years. I chatted very briefly to a professor last week about what the outlook, uh, you know, is going to be most likely, and what's the feelings on the ground of the Turkish youth. And he is suggesting that if Erdogan remains is voted back in, he doesn't think it's good for democracy. It could land up being a dictatorship. I'm not sure if I do agree with him or not. However, he's also saying it's time for change. And then also, let's look at the issue around Erdogan. Is supporting Russia currently, but he's also part of NATO. How does all of that play out?
Good question, Julie. Let's zone in on the internal dynamics. So, Turkey is one of the strategic nations in the world. It straddles both Europe and Eurasia, and therefore it makes it a very strategic state. As a society, as you know, in 1924, it became a secular republic under Kemal Atatürk, the founder of modern day Turkey.
Mm.
And for decades, it has been part of Europe throughout the Cold War era. And coming into democracy in the 90s, the elites, the political and social elites in Turkey, kind of formed a kind of consensus to ensure the stability of the state, the stability of institutions, and especially the military and the judiciary. And these institutions are the most entrenched power structures in Turkish society. But obviously, in the last 3 decades, the kind of Muslim identity movement under Erdogan has grown to become a majority, but in a very, very small, slight majority. Very similar to Brazil with the Lula versus Bolsonaro camps.
Mm.
And therefore, society is divided, but it's also a very kind of enterprising society. So the power of big business, the power of capital, straddle both classes, both the secular world as well as the. Remember, Turkey under Erdogan is very much a Muslim merchant class, conservative, traditional identity state, whereas the opposition is very much secular, social democratic, liberal. And therefore, if you were to visit Turkey, you would see these two societies living side by side, but contesting the public sphere. So it's a very interesting internal dynamic that plays itself out both in regional politics and in global politics.
My next question obviously had to do with the NATO partnership of Erdogan, but also supporting Russia. Um, Depending how the elections play out, what do you foresee? If Erdogan is still in power, obviously that situation, that relationship with Russia will be strengthened. Would the other NATO parties still want to keep him on as a member?
Good question, Julie. Um, Look, Turkey is a NATO member formally, so it subscribes to the NATO kind of ethos and laws, but it also has its own independent foreign policy. And I spoke to several Turkish professors over the weeks, and they said, look, Turkey's first interest is the national interest. So as a result, the state and the elite would ensure that whichever bloc they participate in, whether it's in the EU or in NATO or in the Eurasian Economic Forum with Russia and China or with the grain deal with Ukraine, they will ensure that Turkish interests come first in those forums. So it's very much a very strong national interest foreign policy position, and that is supported by all the elites, including the opposition. I think the difference is in values. The real battle in Turkish society is around social values, around the role of freedom of expression, of family values, of governance, of the contestation in the public sphere. You must know that the Workers' Party, the PKK, has been repressed both by the Turkish state under Erdogan as well as the previous Ataturk state. So workers or worker movement are severely repressed. So it's very much a kind of neoliberal capitalist state, whether it has been under Erdogan or under the Ataturks. So this is a state that's committed to capitalism, to neoliberalism, to tourism, all these kind of things. And therefore, genuine social transformation is very difficult to achieve in such a society.
What happens if the opposition comes in? Do you think you'll see changes as far as that scenario is concerned?
The changes would be cosmetic because, in my view, and that of many academics, the state is definitely a capitalist kind of ruling bloc that ensures the stability of capital and big business above everything else. So, yes, there will be cosmetic changes, but substantively, the state will continue as it has been for the last several decades, as long as the enabling environment for capitalism and profit accumulation is there. Big business or NATO or the EU or Russia or China, they'll be happy with it. I don't see any substantive changes. Changes may come in the social or in the liberal sphere. If, let's say, for instance, the opposition wins, you may get more relaxation around, let's say, freedom of expression or media or right to organize, etc., etc. But I think the underlying superstructure will continue to operate.
My final question then. We do know that the opposition is talking about under Erdogan's watch, inflation is absolutely rampant. There also has been talks that after the earthquake disaster, relief hasn't been coming through as swiftly as the victims has expected. A lot of the people have not yet had housing supplied as was promised by Erdogan. Those are two very pressing issues as far as the Turkish people are concerned. Do you think that would work against Erdogan? And do you think that the opposition would be able to fix that issue? I mean, it's going to take a lot of work to bring the inflation down to acceptable levels, or perhaps affordable levels, so to speak.
Yes, look, in an election cycle, the opposition will find all the weak points in government, and they would bring that up as an issue, as they've done so with the earthquake issue. So I think whoever were in government, the challenges of the earthquake would remain. I think the focus would be on better governance, better functioning of institutions, especially around service delivery, but also tackling issues around cronyism, around like they have their own forms of tenderpreneurship and all those kind of things. And they would push for much more transparency. But remember, they also part of the system, especially big business, and they're very entrenched in the army and as well as in the judiciary. So these are the kind of contestations that will take place. They may be much more effective as using maybe the judiciary to earn their political objectives, or they may be at a very difficult moment, they may bring in the military, as the attempted 2016 coup against Erdogan. It was the military officers and the military in particular, possibly working with some NATO structures that tried to overthrow Erdogan in 2016. And therefore, at that point, only did Erdogan shift towards the east or Russia, because, he was undermined by the army and NATO. So it's not necessarily that he turned to the east because of some political ideology. So it's a very complicated society, very complicated politics, and I think it would be an interesting times ahead. But the superstructure, the elites are the same. They have vested interests to keep the system going.
And that's where we leave it. We'll be watching this space very, very closely indeed. Thank you indeed for your insights. Till the next time, as always, Ashraf Patel, always a pleasure talking with you.
Shukran, Atichali.